This episode, we're talking about the plumbing. Mist. Damn. This episode, we're talking about the plumbing. We're talking about the plumbing. One more. Last try.
Okay, so this video is gonna be about plumbing. Usually it's just me on camera, but I've got my dad with me this time. What's your name?
My name is Thaddeus Reeder.
We're here at my dad's house in the barn. It's cold. It's like 45 degrees out and it's raining, so that's why we don't see the van right now. It's just parked out in the rain and we're here in the barn. And Rocky's just meandering around. I think plumbing can be very simple for van conversions, and it can also be very difficult, and I definitely took the difficult route. Since I knew I was living in there full time, I wanted to have a shower, a large freshwater tank to support the shower, 33 gallons, hot water heater so I could take hot showers, a sink with a water purifier. Oh, and I wanted a flushing toilet too. It quickly turned into more work than I expected. When doing the plumbing, it's kind of a process that you do throughout the build, since you need to get things in place in order to run the water lines to the things that you need water with. And what we started out doing was kind of framing everything out. So like, this is where my bedroom was gonna be. This is where the shower is gonna sit. This is where the kitchenette's gonna sit. This is where we're gonna place the hot water heater. You need to know where all those things are gonna live before you start running all your water lines and putting in your pump and your accumulator tank and things like that. And so once we had everything framed up, we knew where we wanted to put the tank. And so my batteries are placed in my garage in the back right corner, right next to the wheel well. And so that's like 300 pounds. And so I thought, okay, then let's put the water tank on the opposite side so when it's full, it's kind of like a counterbalance. Once we knew where that was going, it was time to figure out how we wanted to put in the water hatch. And so that's what we started out with the water hatch. Do you remember doing that at all?
Yeah, I can remember.
Yeah,
Bits and pieces of that.
We ended up setting it above the shore power inlet, which I was a little nervous about because water and electricity.
But when you're trying to fit 10 pounds of shit into a 5-pound bag, you gotta put things where ever you can get them.
Yeah, so you only can put holes in the van in certain spots of the sidewalk. Or the things that we got to be aware of are this ribbed piece on the side, so then we won't get a flushed mount, and then, you know, getting around that's going to be a pain in the ass. In the inside of the van, there's brackets too. You know, there's the support brackets that keep the structure of the van. And so you have to avoid those as well. And my dad just kind of marked out a template with a red Sharpie, and then we put some pilot holes in the corners, and then I took a jigsaw and cut out the box for the hatch.
Smile for the camera.
Aim it a little.
Uh-oh. Get it in the eye.
Again, I wasn't wearing safety goggles, and that time I did get a little hot shard right next to my eye, and I remember we had to like stop for a minute, and then my dad came back with a grinder, and we finished that out. Cleaned it up with the pencil grinder, and then it was actually, you know, it's pretty simple. It's just a square, and we got it to fit in there. And again, it was just butyl with self-tapping screws.
Great, I thought I was recording, but I lined it with butyl and I pushed it in there, and now it's in there. Now I'm gonna set some self-tappers.
So once we had the hatch, we were kind of set. You know, it's like, this is where we got to put the tank and everything so we can keep it all in that area. And I think in an ideal world, all of your plumbing would be to one side of the van. But with the layout that I wanted, it wasn't going to work that way. We ended up putting the bathroom on the left side and then the kitchenette with the sink on the right side, which means we had to do a lot of like running all around the place with the...
And we had to make sure that the pump was accessible because later on...
which we'll get into that. So the next thing we jumped into was getting the pump and the accumulator tank into the van.
The accumulator tank's only about, what is that, 8 inches long, including that guy. The water pump is the same thing.
They're both SureFlow products. They're not that expensive. They're affordable. They're really small. They're only like 8 inches. And what the pump does is send water through your lines. It creates a pressure, and the accumulator tank holds that pressure so that your pump doesn't overwork itself, right? Basically, it's like a balloon that fills up with air, and it holds the pressures within your lines. And so we needed to create a mount to then mount it in the van. And some people will just take a piece of ply and mount it to the piece of ply, and that's how they do it. And maybe that's an easier way to do it, but my dad
fabricated a bracket.
Yeah, out of what?
Out of scrap materials.
Right, and it was old snowmobile parts.
Yeah. Well, a lot of old stuff. I'm a bit of a pack rat because you never know when you might need something, and if you were to look around this barn, you'll see what I'm saying. And a lot of times it's come in handy.
Yeah, so he has a lot of random stuff sitting around, and he had some old snowmobile parts because we used to ride snowmobiles a lot as kids. I don't think growing up I ever had anything new. It was always some old busted thing that he would get for cheap, and then we'd fix it, and then we'd ride it for a little bit and bust it again, and then fix it and bust it again, and that's how it was. Yep. So we've got a lot of parts from a lot of things in here. So I don't think building a mount from a snowmobile thing is going to be something everyone's going to do. But that's what we did. He fabricated up this this bracket, and we ended up mounting it in front of the water tank because we knew we'd have to run a line out of the tank from the front end of it because we ended up putting it tall. I don't know. It wasn't hamburger. It was hot dog style, you know.
That's a description.
And so it stands up, and the water comes out the bottom. And we wanted it to have as short of a run to the pump to then run to everything else.
So the idea is to try to save space, and since these are on rubber grommets, they'll hopefully absorb the vibrations that these are going to produce when they're working or running. So the idea is to set this here, put the water tank in this space, and then box off the whole area, including a top spot, so that we have access to the water inlet hoses, the city plugins, the exhaust pipe, the accumulator tank, and the water pump.
And so we were able to fabricate this thing up, put it in there, and we mounted it down with really long bolts into the frame.
So we're gonna put some carriage bolts to hold that thing down.
When you start mounting things in this van,
where you're at,
there's a lot of stuff underneath the van already running. And so you've got to look out for the framing of it, you know, because you can't get access once you pop in there.
Yeah.
There's brake lines.
Sometimes it's just poke and hope.
Yeah, so we did our best to guess, and we barely made it. There's our 4 holes. We only need 2. We screwed up on 2 of them. It went into the frame. So we will be using this one and this one. And I'm going to go under and mount them up. So when I drilled the holes, I did nick the brake line, but just the plastic coating. Right there. Nailed it. Because it came right out of here. Super close call. And so we mounted that down, and that was pretty easy.
Got that mounted on, which is our crazy water pump accumulator tank contraption.
Once we had the pump and the accumulator tank mounted, we took the freshwater tank and we had to puncture some holes in it because it'll come with 2 holes that are open. I think they're 1/2 inch threaded female holes.
Yeah.
And there's 2.5-inch holes that aren't punched through. And they recommend, now that I've looked back, to take a razor blade, because it's a real thin membrane, to cut that out, rather than what we did, which was take a hole saw, which created shrapnel, which was then really difficult
Clean out.
to get out. And so
As
we took
well
the
as
air
you
compressor and
slugged it.
blew it out and shook it and did all sorts of stuff to get as much as we could out. If you would have just took a blade and then worked it out and made sure you didn't cut it all the way so you can actually
Like
pull it
opening
out
up
with
a tuna
pliers.
can.
Yeah.
Well, you live and learn.
Yeah. But that's something you guys can do correctly.
Getting plastic out of the water tank sucks.
Once we had that in place, Tim actually came over, our neighbor, and he's a plumber, and he was able to be like, okay, so I can kind of grab some products that I have in my truck, and we can maybe just do some dummy lines. The 1/2-inch hole on the top was our breather line. In order to fill the tank, you have to have water or air able to escape, or else you'd just be spitting water back out at yourself. And then the 1/2-inch hole on the bottom was our feed line, so the water would
line.
come out of there, the supply line. And then the 1.5-inch would be our fill line. We hooked up a big 1.5-inch tube, which you just had here. You had it, maybe it was from the pool or something. And so we had a basic idea, and one of the things we didn't think about before going into it was having a 3-way valve, like a ball valve.
Okay, so you fill this and it's full of water, and then you got a pump that pushes water to the water heater and to the cold of the two colds. You got a sink in a shower. Goes into the water heater, and then it goes to the 2 hots. You're gonna have 3 colds because you got a toilet. But if you have this 3-way valve, it would be open this way to where the water goes from here to here. A 3-way valve, when you turn it 1/4 turn, it closes this way and opens this way, and then this is where your hose. You have to separate the pump and the accumulator and the storage tank from the city water. So this is pressurized, this is suction, this is actually creating the pressure. So right here at this T is where you have to have the 3-way valve.
You can choose, basically. So if you're running city water, it creates its own pressure. It's already pressurized water. So you don't need your pump. So you're bypassing your pump, and then it's just going to run straight through your lines, and then you flip that valve when you want to run off your tank and your pump. And then up into that. He kind of told us this is what's going to happen in order to get your water running to your shower, to your water heater, to your back to your sink, and then out. And he kind of introduced us to this PEX pipe. Actually, it is a really great product.
Yes,
it's not like the cheapest thing in the world, but you can really bend it around corners and super forgiving. And then like when it's cold, the water has a place to expand if it freezes. And you know, we did
Copper
use
doesn't allow that.
no, and he also brought braided lines,
Yep.
threaded braided lines. And so everything we were working with was a 1/2-inch. But we basically got an idea of how we wanted to do things, and then we just stopped because during that time we had to finish the electrical and get the bed in and have the kitchenette set, because I only had a week of time to get the thing livable before I had to move out of my house and live in the van. And so I put together some framing and boxed it all in so that when I'm driving it didn't shake all over the place, and it was kind of just stuck where it was.
Whoops.
And then during the first month when I lived in September, Kyle and I tried to rig it up.
Tank to filter to pump to this guy, which will then go to accumulator, and then everything else is outside the van. Or you can go from city straight through to your accumulator, so that all this will be cut off and go to everything.
You have 2 ways of getting water. So you have a city line, which is just like taking a garden hose and plugging it directly into your van. When you flip the 3-way to the tank, the freshwater tank, it goes through a filter first. Then it goes to the pump and the accumulator. So, and then it goes out to everything.
Cold water will come out of the accumulator. You have one that runs to your hot water tank, and the other one will go to the shower, SO's shower, TO's toilet, and the sink. So then, the hot water coming out of that will come back the same route, and it will need to go to the shower and to the sink.
And so one hot line comes out and then it splits. And so one hot line goes up for the shower head, and then one hot line has to go all the way back and around, all the way back through behind the fridge into the sink, which is kind of, that's where having it on one side, everything on one side, would be more ideal. That just means it takes a lot longer for me to get hot water. I have to run the cold for a while for it to get all out of the lines from going to come out of the sink. So something we did wrong was we didn't put the filter after the three-way. The water coming from the city isn't being filtered, it's just going straight in, which is kind of risky because, you know, depending on where you plug in, like you have a hard water line here, which could be really detrimental to your system. But you have to be careful. You know, like if you're filling up at somebody's barn or something like that, you need to know that you're not just pulling off a hard well water and you have some type of filtration going through there. Once the lines were ran to the hot water heater, those lines were just kind of left open, so we weren't running any water through it yet. And then we had a line ran for the toilet, so that was just kind of sitting there, a braided line. And then we also had the lines running for the sink. And all of that is PEX. All of that is PEX tubing. And then I did put in some braided lines to get around some corners. Another thing too, just to say what you have to have for the PEX things, all the pieces and adapters are shark bite. Like, you just get these crimp rings. You have to get a crimper tool, which is kind of pricey, but Tim had one that he just let us use. And then they have these little adapter bits. They're barbed plastic tees. They have spin-on, like, twist-off pieces so you can, like, clean out spots.
Adapters,
And so what we had to do for the sink was, in the cold line, we had to splice it and then put in this little, like, pass-through for the water filter. So that adapter is going to allow me to connect to my filtration system via this tiny little hose, right? Yep. And Rocky's on guard duty. And it's all pressure. You know, you just push those. Yeah, they're pressure fittings. So you just push those in, and then it runs through a three-way water filter, which then runs up to a little spigot and pours out. And then the hot and cold waters, they're just hooked up to shut-off valves. This is a 1/2 inch to 3/8 elbow with a shut-off valve, and another 1/2 inch to 3/8 elbow with a shut-off valve. Hot water. Hot water. Hot. You always have to have access to your water, like your pump, your accumulator tank, your filter. You have to have access to all that stuff because things break. Things are going to have to be replaced. The filter you got to clean all the time, and
isolate the system.
You have to be able to turn your water off too. Things were decently hooked up.
Right now you've got city water in, so if I were to do that, city water comes in, goes through here, goes through your accumulator, out the back side of your accumulator into here, which then gets distributed, or put her on that jobber. And you go from the tank, through your strainer, to your pump, through here, up, over, down through your accumulator, to there, and out. You're officially hooked up, dude.
We didn't buy all the proper things, and he had made some like long cuts, and I had to go back and kind of clean it up. My dad was immediately like, "You didn't fix this part. This isn't holding on good." Okay. This is the cold water line for the toilet, which had no connection to it, which we forgot about. And so we put on this braided hose, and then we pulled out the entire water outlet bit. It ran there, it ran up here, and then it had a bend to it because the pipes weren't cut to the right size. So I think I've got this fixed, and it's tight now. And we're close here. Now, this is very easily accessible from there. This runs down
into the pump itself, which we're cutting a PEX to fit that right, and then we're gonna mount it right there.
Knowing that we had to put the walls up to block everything off, like the main access point we had to the pump and the accumulator tank and the filter, we would just have this little box opening. I made sure we cleaned everything up. And so we spent a good amount of time, several weekends, putting the shower together, which is going to be a separate video because it was such an undertaking. Using metal and all this stuff, like it wasn't your standard shower. I wanted it to be this rustic look, and plus I had a toilet I wanted to put in there. It was just a whole thing. So I'm not going to focus on that in this. I'm just going to focus on getting the shower mixer and the head in there and stuff like that. So I ended up purchasing this tiny little water efficient shower head from Amazon, and I mean, it's tiny, but I wanted copper lines, exposed copper lines with twist off valves for the shower. And Tim, being a plumber, was able to come over and just sweat all those joints together, cut the pipes down, and do it really fast. He did it like in 30 minutes, had that installed. We ran the lines to it in the back, and then it was time to test it out. All right, so we're about to test the water for the first time, and we got city water running in.
You want to do it so I could film what happens?
The shower was good, you know, the water ran through the hot water heater and we had water running out, which was great. Then we went to the sink, and then when I look into the sink, it was leaking everywhere.
So as you can see, the sink is now drenched.
Why is it leaking out? It's not hooked up?
I hadn't pushed in the tubes into the water filter hard enough, and so that was just like everywhere. You really have to jam those in there.
So this is no longer leaking, which is a good sign.
Yeah, you didn't. That push connector was not
Pushed all the way in. Okay. And then we are leaking below.
And so yeah, we found leaks right off the bat. Then it was like, okay, we've got some leaks on the hot water heater, and that's when we had those brass fittings that we tried to use Teflon tape to mount it to the hot water heater, and we quickly realized like that's not working, and so we switched them out.
This is a female swivel adapter, so it spins. Right. So you can crimp it on, and you can still tighten it upon it. And it also has that gasket in there, that rubber gasket, which will prevent the water from leaking out. Those other ones that are on there currently do not have those gaskets, so we're using thread tape, which doesn't seem to be doing the trick. Those are now in place, and everything's crimped on. Hopefully there's no more leaks.
And those were a lot better. And it is smarter to have a twist off on the hot water heater, just in case you got to work on it. Or right.
So something I'm gonna do, these are my sink lines, and this area right here is where the fridge goes. So I've got to take this, and this is like a pinch point. When I push the fridge back, it hits and it pinches these against this post. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut it right around probably here, put some adapters on it with some braided lines, run the braided lines behind it, and then reconnect it here so that it's not so tight within here. Alright, so you can see here I've now got them both behind the bend, and you know, we might have to prop them up so they're not touching. Then I put the PEX between, then I ran it to 2, braided again. They're out of the way, which was the main thing. Those run up into here, which are now easy to access and loose. So I cleaned it up a little more. I just got a 2x2, some pipe mounts, and staggered them so that you can get access to both of them.
And so we replaced that stuff and then fixed all of our leaks, got everything connected right, and then it was time to test out our pump. Okay, so we've disconnected the city water, which worked. We had some loose connections, which we tightened back up, but things seem to be running in the proper order now. Now,
we filled it up. I've put a fuse in for the water pump, and then I'm gonna flick the switch to turn the water pump on. And I think I don't know how much water we actually have in the tank itself, but it should be about halfway maybe. Now that we have this plugged, these turned off, and the sink is all hooked up and turned off, we should get pressure from the water pump. And I don't know what the accumulator tank's gonna do, but
Probably have to bleed some air out of your line.
as long as you're pointing that toward my face.
There's your air. Won't build pressure until you get all the air out of the line. And you'll hear it shut off. There you go.
What?
Huh?
Cool, hold on.
Alright, here, run this one. Now you haven't put the bucket under that. There you go. Right up. Yep, perfect. That's the accumulator, keeping constant pressure. Woo! Red letter day for Benjamin Roy.
That was a really good feeling. That was like success. We had actually created a running system.
I actually seen you smile that day.
Yeah. So, gray water. Water from the sink and water from the shower needed to go somewhere.
Not just right on the ground.
Right. And so we needed to figure out a way to have a gray water holding tank that we could empty.
Today we're gonna go through all the plumbing as well as hooking up the gray water and mounting the gray water tank underneath the van.
This is a whole thing. I know a lot of people are having issues with this with these Ram ProMasters, is finding a place to mount a gray tank. First, I found a little pocket that was gonna work. We got a 13-gallon tank that fit that dimensions, and it was like a 21 by 16, 9 inches deep, which was fine. It's got plenty of clearance. We got it to fit in there, and then my dad had to fabricate another thing, which was a mounting bracket.
Right.
Which was what, angle iron? No, it wasn't.
No,
it
all
was
flat.
all flat.
Bent what I had to bend, drilled the hole, welded together.
Explain what this is.
This is for holding the gray water strap bracket. So we use 1/8 inch, 1 inch wide metal, which we bent, welded together, fit up to go to each frame rail. It's more than enough support. I'm covering it with a primer and paint mixture to make sure that the elements don't rot it away.
And then we put some like double-sided tape
Right.
to set it in there.
Right, so that the vibrations didn't rub a hole. in the
Right.
tank.
We mounted that up with just self-tappers straight to the frame.
Right.
We got it mounted up, and it was just enough clearance. Like the emergency brake line literally is like not a fourth of an inch from touching it.
Nobody's here. There's a code to the door and I don't know it. And no one's answering their phone.
Greg has a shop, and he has a lift that's able to pick my van up so we could get under there and actually work on
And
it.
he's got heat and air conditioning in there.
Yeah, we're freezing right now.
And this is Coco.
Yeah, I'm Coco. So the sink's back out, the oven's out, and the fridge is out because we're trying to figure out exactly where we're going to want to take the gray water line through this back wall and then out through the bottom to hit the gray water holding tank.
Figuring out a way to get a line from the sink behind the AC unit, not hit the fridge, all this stuff. We had to figure out a way to get a tube out to then go down into a gray water tank.
Tie into that, yeah.
So it was a really tight fit, and we ended up putting a line really close to the AC unit. And you can't break the AC unit box because that's airtight. You know, you can't have any leak there.
Okay, so that's where we ended up with our hole. As you can see, it's right on the edge of both corners. So hopefully we can jam something up there.
So we figured a way to get a line, a PVC line, and we're not using PEX anymore. This is just straight PVC.
PVC, yeah.
And
Standard PVC.
which you need the glue and the
Yeah.
cleaning thing and the whatever, all that stuff. And anyways, we ran all that stuff, but then it needed to drain. Okay, so this stuff, it's all a mess right now, disconnected. But that black PVC pipe runs to that white PVC pipe back there, which means it needs to step down and be adjusted with height. And I'm not exactly sure how we're gonna connect the two. Might have to just do a completely different fitting for that tube to run to there. But that's the last connection that we need to make to then have somewhere for that water to go, and then I can reconnect all this water.
You had to choke down what normally you use to.
It was an
1
inch and a half line to an inch line,
Yeah,
which was
1
an
inch.
issue because we had to figure a way to connect that, which
Right.
eventually we did figure
Yeah,
a step
we
down
built the,
and put a clean
adapter.
out in there,
Right.
which I think is really important. So if you have some type of blockage, you can kind of pull it out and do exactly that. You can clean it out. All right, it's all sealed up. It's not the prettiest looking thing in the world, but that little piece back there, this guy, that's the thing I had to get in there, and now it's all sealed up. We ran down through the sink, and then the shower was just literally straight down through the floor, which I believe was just a standard inch and a half, but we had issues with that, threading it to the...
Yeah, because of we had installed. You had installed base.
And the threading was different.
Yeah,
Rock.
it is.
Go ahead and spin it. Are you spinning? You're not spinning up here. Nah. Are you loosening it? Nah.
By that time, you couldn't take the base back up. You should have stubbed it through the floor
Before we
then
put
I
the
could have
walls
worked
in and everything.
Yeah, right, before actually mounting that down.
So that's
and the
something
toilet.
that you guys can do differently, is figure out the drainage while you could still move the pan. Like, we had already sealed the pan and locked it down before we did all that stuff, so getting it twisted on and threaded was a serious pain. We put a sealant in there to be a buffer between the metal frame of the van and the PVC. That happened, we got those in, and then it was time to figure a way to run those lines down to meet, because then you need to have it run through a trap, a P-trap. Okay, so I realized I didn't get a good shot of my final setup, so I'm down here in the snow capturing it. So this is coming from the sink, running back, which, yeah, you can see my lines are dirty now, which then runs around, and then here's the shower line, which drops down and then goes back up, and then they both meet right there, and then they run in to the P-trap here. There's a rubber flap in there, like a blown out balloon, which
So
keeps
that
the
it could be
smells.
mounted horizontally.
Oh yeah, it was a horizontal one. And it keeps the smells from coming from the gray and blowing back up
Right.
into it. And so you need to have your lines meet there to go into the tank. Having it go up at the shower there isn't ideal, but we had to have it go in at the top of the tank, you know, and since it's gravity fed, well, we had to make sure everything got up there to go in and then feed down and go through here. And so a lot of these RVs, like these Class Bs that you could buy, like the Travato, which is built off my van, you know, it's the same type of van, they have pumps to drain out their gray water, while I used gravity. And so that was one of the main things we knew we needed to do, because it's such a tight fit and there's not a lot of up and down. Like, you're not getting a ton of gravity height-wise. I don't know. Things aren't dropping very far. This is where the water will escape the holding tank of the gray water, and now we need to figure out where to mount the actual drainage area, the access point. And the idea is,
Back over the axle.
because
Well, otherwise we have to cross right on top of the exhaust, which will melt the pipe, or the hose, whichever we use. This will give protection from the road, the axle itself. And we got a good shot to the back where we can mount the valve. The dump valve itself.
it's like a drainage valve.
Dump valve.
And it's like you could it has a gate that you open,
Right.
and it's a twist off.
Camper
Right.
or an RV.
It's
you know.
your standard RV drainage, and
Mounted it to the
but you had
bumper.
to make a bracket for that to mount it, and then we mounted it to the. I bought a hitch, like a bumper hitch type deal from Kurt, which I put on prior, and then we mounted it straight to that, and then we had a drainage. And so we had an 1.5 inch line that runs out to, it's like a 6-foot run that goes along the exhaust. And then it lands at the rear.
And then it drains out there.
And so there was my gray water. It's pretty basic when you think about it. It's just running 2 lines meeting together into a tank, out the tank. The issue that we ran into in the winter was freezing. Having the gray water outside the van leaves it open to the elements. And that causes a lot of issues when the weather's hit freezing temps. And so I thought, okay, they sell these tank heat pads. Why don't we just go and put one in? We'll put one down there, and we'll put one in on the fresh water.
Yep.
The one on the bottom wasn't a big deal. You know, that's just self-tapping screws we were able to get out and put one up there and then run the wires up through the back. We had a bit of a headache with the freshwater tank because the lines are all ran to it. It's framed in really tight. So we had to pull all that out and then
Right.
like open it up and then shimmy it underneath,
Jack it up.
which is all glue. It's like those things are all adhesive side.
Right.
The
so we
heat
had to
pad.
Slide it under there and then lower the tank back down on it. to
Yeah,
make it stick
and
to
then
it.
fish the wires out to then run to
Yeah,
the
that was
DC.
a real treat.
So that was a pain, but it did work to keep the tanks thawed, but it pulls a lot of power. You kind of have to be plugged into shore power if you want to run those overnight. I didn't do that. I ended up draining my batteries to 0, but I've talked about that. But the lines still freeze. And that was the other issue we were running into. I think if I were to do it again, I think we would make the line shorter, go out the side, be a dump on the side, because that's how RVs are
Probably,
usually.
right, yeah.
It's instead of having like a 3 or a 6 or 7 foot run,
Right.
we would just do a 2 foot.
Right.
And I also think that because it's mainly just like non-harmful dish soap and non-harmful body wash that's coming out, I would just have the water run straight out. Like a clean out would do it. You could just have it so you can open it up, pull out a piece, and it just drains and it doesn't go into the holding tank. You know, during the winter months especially.
yeah.
Like, and if you're in a park, you can't do that. But
Right.
when I'm parking in my buddy's driveway or random spots and just a little runoff,
Leave it open.
leave it open, because then you're not holding water that can freeze and cause issues. And so I think if we go back in there and we fix these things, that's something we would do. I have used the RV antifreeze stuff. It only does so much. Like, that's for people who aren't staying in the van. They put it in there to keep their tanks fine. You know, like you fill up that 13-gallon tank really quick, and then you got to empty that antifreeze out and then fill it back up and then empty it out and fill it back up. It's just kind of a constant battle. Then we had a huge freeze where it was like negative 30 degrees out. I wasn't at the van. I was gone for work for a week, and I came back and all my lines had
Because
frozen
the-
because I didn't do anything. I didn't pay attention to the weather, first off.
Right.
I was worried about running the air while I wasn't there, just in case something happened where the gas leaked and then I blew the van up or
Oh,
something
yeah, you
like
didn't
that.
want to run the heat.
Right. What I should have done
Uh-huh.
is drained everything out.
Right.
I should have blown out all my lines, and then I should have opened everything
Left them all wide open.
so that the water had a place to go rather than forcing itself out, because what had happened was the water forced its way through my valves and blew those valves out. It broke the copper. It
With the copper elbow.
broke right through the copper elbow. It popped my shower head off, so that ball joint just poof, and then a big icicle was poking out. All the PEX was fine. Like, all that stuff
Yeah, that does
survived.
make it, right.
Then yeah, once we got in there, it was like chasing this leak. We couldn't find it. Well, you're getting air in your lines, you're never gonna hold pressure, and so I could, like, my pump never shut off, and so months we spent
Oh,
trying to
yeah.
find it, and it was like
Replace the pump.
Yeah.
Replace
the
this.
accumulator. Like, it was the accumulator, the balloon
Yeah.
blown. Nope, that was fine. And then we screwed with the filter.
Yeah, finally
And then we
found that.
finally found, like, we were blowing in it, and it was like, it's leaking here.
can hear it's leaking.
We figured out that that was bad, and then the connection it had was bad too, because that was like a Teflon wrapped piece, so we replaced that as well. Yeah, that took forever, and I mean, that was a lesson learned. And I think going back through, if I were to do it again, I would probably insulate the interior lines just to have them insulated. I would insulate the exterior lines too. I don't think a lot of people do that because they don't live in freezing temps in the van during those months.
Normally
they
people
winterize it.
Normal
Issue for them.
people don't.
Yeah. I would say definitely insulate your lines if you're going to be in like a really cold place, and then just be prepared for it to freeze and have jugs of water on the inside to work with.
I finally have water pressure again. Feels good.
Advice. That's my advice. Dad's cold. I'm gonna go in. Yeah, that's it for this video. I think I covered everything. I hope it helped out. You know, click like, subscribe. I will provide links to almost everything I used within the description. I think at the very end of this build series, I will release a video that says, you know, all the costs and expenses and where all the money went and things like that, to help, you know, give you guys an idea of a budget for the type of build I did. But yeah, that's it. I'm gonna go warm up because it's cold. Bye.